now talking about how to use these numbers in a way to refer to nouns, to objects, and people too. So the terminations in the singular for nouns are TL, TLI, LI, and IN. So is its own sound, right? That TL, li, li, and in, right? So these are the four suffixes that basically tell you whether or not, well, to tell you that a word is a noun. So these give finalizing, making substances out of things, right? Making something a noun. So whenever we're talking about numbers, we're also talking about plurals. So when we swap into talking about quantities of things, the plurals, the suffix ending changes. So these are the three suffix endings that we use for plurals. So me, tin, and one. So me, tin, and one. Right? Okay. So we'll go into those in greater detail. Frankie, do you mind scrolling to the next page? Sorry. Meh. So yeah, remember that J is like an aspiration. It's a soft H. So meh. So so meh, tin, and one. So meh is used whenever the noun ends in TL. So instead of that TL drops off, and then you add meh to talk about a plural version of it. So the word for man is tlacat. Tlacat. Right? Right. Whenever when you shift it, when you add, so when you turn it into a plural, the plural of tlacat is tlacame. Tlacame. Now, just as a little bit of a note, we had been talking in previous classes that when you're talking about pronunciation and stress on the word, it's in penultimate syllable, right? Because this last part is one sound, one syllable, so tlacat, right? So the accent is on the tlacat, right? Whenever you add the med to this word, it changes the number of syllables in the word, and so it changes where the stress is on that word. So tlacame. Now this second A becomes the A with the stress. So it went from tlacat to tlacame, right? So tlacame is men, right? Tlacat singular, tlacame men. Siwat. Siwat. Siwat is woman, and the plural is siwame. Siwame. So if I say tlacame iwan siwame, I'm saying men and women, right? So me is the suffix that you use for nouns that end in TL. And so our next example is the suffix tin. Now tin is only generally used for the other endings in so the TLI, LI, and IN. And the reason why it's more for euphonics. Again, it's a way to make the word sound good. Yeah. So in this example here, the word is tochtli, right? Tochtli is rabbit. So that ending, that TLI, falls off and is replaced with tin. Tochtin. Remember the accent. Tochtin. So tochtin, right? Tlaxcali or tlaxcahle. So tlaxcale is how you would say it in Guerrero Nahuatl. That softer J and LE. That is the way that you would So tlaxcahle is how you say tortilla in Nahuatl. And so whenever that gets shifted, the tin gets added. So just as a point of reference, all words that end in LLI in the Guerrero Nahuatl have this ple sound to it. It softens. So this is the normal way that you would say tlaxcahle in Guerrero. Tlaxcahle, tortilla, right? But whenever you pluralize a word, it retains the sound of the classical Nahuatl. So that tlaxcal, that hard L, is retained in the plural. So tlaxcaltin. Tlaxcaltin is the word for tortillas, plural, right? So tlaxcahle, tlaxcaltin. Yeah? Tlaxcale,
You can use either?
For so
Plural.
are you talking about for these? Or for the singular?
Oh, that's singular.
So these are singular,
Oh.
yeah. So these refer to the endings of suffixes in singular, and then when you pluralize it, it becomes tin. So tlaxcaltin is the plural of tlaxcali or tlaxcahle. So both words are, yes, question?
Does this have any? Does this make any difference when you add in the possessive prefix prefix?
Yes, yes, yes. And that is the third example of the finalized ending. And perfect segue. So one is used for possessed nouns. And generally in the classical, only animated objects could be pluralized, so living things. But in the contemporary, this is a bit different. So one is applied to possessed nouns. So like, for example, the example that I gave is conet, right? So if we remember in the previous classes we covered that the word conet refers to child, right? A child or a kid, a boy. Generally it's masculine, right? So whenever you possess a noun, the ending falls off and you add the prefix that tells you whose child it is, whose noun. So conet becomes no cone. No cone is saying my child. No cone, right? So, but if you want to say my children, you would add one to the, no cone one, my children. No represents the concept of my. Cone is that root word that tells you the substance is a child, and then one tells you it's more than one. So it's a pluralized possessive. It's a pluralized possessed noun. Did that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Another example that I gave is coyote, right? The word coyote comes from the word coyo. If you were to possess it and say his or her coyote is icoyo, right? Icoyo. Yeah, that TL falls off because it's not necessary for this. You know that it's pluralized, so it falls. And then whenever this becomes pluralized, you add one to it. So icoyo one is his or her coyotes plural. Yeah? Icoyo one. Yeah. And so they're coyotes. Yeah? Well, his or her coyotes.
How do you say, what's the plural of boy child, just on its own?
Okay, so now this is so conet is generally, so now this is the thing. So generally in modern varieties of Nahuatl, the words for human nouns have what they call a gender bias. So it's assumed to be masculine unless otherwise stated. In previous classes we've covered gender, wherein in order to specify that you're talking about a female child, you would add the siwa, right? This root part that tells you it's female, feminine, to the word conet. So if you say siwa conet, you're saying my girl, my female child, my daughter. Yeah. So yeah, no siwa cone one is saying my daughters. Yeah. So no siwa cone is saying my daughter. No siwa cone one
The
is saying.
plural that you're saying, because it ends in TL, would change to me, right? So it'd be coneme.
Wait, what are you
That would
talking
be the plural of
Oh.
conet.
So yes. So if you were just talking about daughters or children in general, it would be me. But if it's possessed, if you're telling whose child it is, then the ending is one, because it's a possessed noun. So yeah, if you were just talking about daughters in general, or pluralized daughters, you would just say siwa coneme. Siwa coneme is daughters, plural, but unpossessed. And then when you say no siwa cone one, you're saying my female child's plural. Yeah?
Children, yeah.
My daughters.
My daughters.
So how would you say how many?
Huh?
How many?
So you'd say qu'est-ce que. So right, like if you're gonna ask.
How many?
So you could say qu'est-ce que siwa cone one tikpia. Basically saying like how many children do you have? In the same way that when we learned how to ask, how many years you have, it's literally the same concept. So you say qu'est-ce que is how many, right? Quantity. And then you'd add, well, you could say mocone, which is like, or moconeguan is like literally saying your children, plural. We covered this concept of possessed nouns in previous classes, but it's all on the material available on the website for you guys to peruse. And then once we recycle back, we can hammer it home at greater depth.
Do people possess coyotes?
You can own them.
Okay.
Yeah, you can, like, it's not like a literal. Yeah, it's anything. Any noun can be
The idea
possessed.
of a pet
Yeah.
belongs to you.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not gonna be fined if they catch it.
Right. I mean, yeah. So, but I just used it as an example so that people could see that, like, not only is it just for like my family, a human. It's also, you can use it for animals. You can do it for dogs. You can do it for any object, whether living or not. And that's the difference from the classical to the contemporary.
Well, in the
Next up.
classical though, you would say no kokone.
Yeah.
You
So
would
there's
double-
that has also shifted slightly. So so kone used to be, so yeah, in certain words there is what they call a reduplication. So the kokone is a way to say kone plural. It's less used in contemporary varieties of Nahuatl because it requires that understanding that the reduplication means that you're adding more. Or like for example, the word for smoke is poctli. The verb to smoke is poca. And so, but in order to say it really smokes, you would say popoca. It reduplicates to add emphasis that it's more, right? And those aren't, I mean, so it does exist in the language and in contemporary varieties, but it's less often used than the plural suffixes. And
See, and in the
That's why
classical,
it's
you
like
don't use the
both
one.
is
yeah,
So you don't have the one.
exactly. So it definitely, it is shifted from the classical into contemporary varieties in Nahuatl. This has become the norm as compared. And so yeah, I like to add those in for references when we cover like different, well, especially with roots and all that. I tend to leave in the classical just so that you have it as reference, and then we show how those changes have occurred as the way the language develops. You know what I mean? But very good comment. I definitely appreciate that for sure. So okay, the noun here is papalo. Can everybody say papalo? Papalo. Butterfly. In Spanish, we have the word papalote, right? Which is what?
Windmill.
It's a kite. Yeah. So, but it comes from papalo, which is butterfly. Man, I kind of gave. Well, you know what? Let's do that instead. Can we open up the actual the what do you call it? The slide. The what do you call it? The PowerPoint presentation.
I don't know what that.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can get that up because this sort of like it's a two-stage thing where I'm actually kind of giving you the answers. In the other one, I kind of give you the example without the words, and then I have you build on that. Let me see. Okay, here, let me download this real quick. I know, like, I just want to make sure that.
Is the J sometimes a hair?
A he? What do you mean a he? Like
Like for papalome, or is it palome?
Would that change the accent?
No. So the J at the end is just a slight aspiration. So the plural for papalot is papalome. That H is like it's a slight aspiration. It's not really like hard, and it doesn't change the number of syllables. Meh is one phoneme. Meh. So papalot. You want? I just need. Okay. So I kind of ruined the first one, but how would you say two butterflies? We covered numbers, right? Two. How do you say two? Ome, right? How would you pluralize butterfly? Papalome, right? So, do you wanna? How's it going, Mitchell? Yeah. If you wouldn't mind passing him a handout, just so that way he has that for reference. I will try to remember all y'all's names, but returning students, I tend to know them better because I've got their names down. But I will try to learn all y'all's names, I promise. I'm already getting there. Frank, right? Andrew, Eric. It starts with an R. Maggie. Your name? Richie. I'm getting there. Trust me. I will. So.
You just gotta sing Richie Valens songs and you see him in your head and then you'll get it.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say.
Story of my
Many
life.
times.
Every time I meet somebody, they
Yeah.
will scream.
Well, yeah. So, ome papalome, right? I kind of wrote that one up because it sounds funny. So it sounds cool. Ome papalome. 2 butterflies. Papalome is butterflies. Next. Okay. Koyo. Okay. Yeah. Next slide.
So that's
Koyo.
obviously. So
Okay.
the English is obviously from.
Yeah.
The pronunciation of the TL at the end.
Okay, yeah. So the TL is its own sound, and it's not a sound that you have in English or Spanish. Some languages do have it, like Dine does. Yeah, other languages. It's or Tlingit. It's like it's a TL that makes it's like a T, and it's like air's sort of like laterally out of the sides of your mouth. So, well, let me get juices flowing. So the sound is koyo. Koyo. Remember the accent is on the second to last syllable. Koyo. Or that. It's like a tiny explosion in your mouth,
Like on the cheeks.
and the air comes out of the side of your tongue. Yeah, no, and drinking milk doesn't help because like you. But okay, but very good. Yeah, so in the first class we covered sounds of the language and orthography. That TL is its own sound and makes that sound. So koyo, right? Se koyo, right? You don't have to change it because it's only one. There's no pluralization happening, right? Next. Okay. Kali, kahle. Okay. Next slide. Okay. How many? What's the number, people? Nahui or Nahue? Nahue. In the Guerrero Nahua it's Nahue. Nahue. So how would you say 4 houses? No, remember you gotta pluralize it. I'm talking about 4 houses. Right? How would you?
Is it the calme?
No.
What's the word?
Nahuatl.
Yeah. So remember for TLI, LI, and IN, the plural aspect of it is tin. So 4 houses is Nahui or Nahuatl. Nahuatl. 4 houses.
Accent is on the first syllable.
Which is different from like the dates used in the traditional. So, for example, if you say Nahuicali, you can use that as reference to like a year in the sacred calendar, and that's a whole nother ball of wax. But that's more because the name of the year is called 3 house, and not. But it's not pluralized. This is literally saying there are 4 houses, right? So, Nahuicaltin. Yeah.
4 houses.
Yep, 4 houses. Next. Amochtli. The word for book is amochtli. So how would you pluralize it? So the plural would be amoshtin, right? Okay. Next slide. Okay. How many? Yeah. Yeah. So, the survey says, amoshtin, right? So yeah. So yeah. So yay is like the classical, but like I said, the number 3 tends to be the one that has the most pronunciation differences across different varieties of Nahuatl. So yay or a or yeye tends to, there's different ways that you could say 3 in different communities, and that number is more often to change across all the other numbers. So this one is the one that has the most varieties of that particular word. So I just put that up there so that people have a reference if like a different community says it closer to yay than yeye. Yeye is the Nahuatl variety of Guerrero, but
The Y sound is always there.
that y sound tends to be a predominant aspect of that particular word. But yeah, Moshtin. 3 books, right? Moshtin. Shochi. Shochi. So remember that X has a sh sound in Nahuatl in general.
And the CH.
Shochi. Yeah, and that's one of those things too that has changed, like I said, depending on the varieties. Like some people say sochi, some people say shochi. Like that X is normal, or suchil in some. Like for example, when people say sempasuchil, like the sound has changed across varieties, and there are different ways that people have said it and do say it. But in most, that X does retain a sh sound. So the word is shochi. 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 Right. So, all right, people, help me out. How many? Aha. But how would you pluralize flowers? Is there? Does anybody have like a? Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah. Makwili or makwile? Shochime. Remember any. So the good thing to know is that TL is going to be meh. All across the board, TL is meh. Unless it's pluralized, TL is meh. I mean, not pluralized. Unless it's possessed, TL is meh. The rest of them are always going to be bean, unless it's possessed. That's the one where the one goes in. Now, if we wanted to possess these flowers and put that, now you want to give that a shot. Okay, for example, if I were to say my flower, one singular, mine, it'd be noshochi. Noshochi. Noshochi, my flower, one. Okay. Now, how would you pluralize it if it was possessed? No, but you got to remember that no shochiwan. You got to remember that th makes a ch sound. Shochiwan. That one becomes the ending for possessed nouns. Yeah. So my flowers. I didn't specify how many, right? And that's the thing. So
how would you specify how many? In that.
You would
what
add,
order?
Oh, in what order? So you would say, well, you could add the number into the word and say no makwil shochiwan. Literally saying my 5 flowers.
Okay.
No makwil shochiwan. My 5 flowers.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
no becomes.
So you can add numbers inside the word to give added emphasis, or sometimes. But it's also, the good thing about Nahuatl is it's so flexible. You can put the numbers beforehand, or after, or inside. And the word order a lot of the times is very fluid. So
That's what's been confusing.
Yeah.
For me, because I've always heard that the structure is similar to English more than anything.
Yeah.
Or German, and but the pronunciation, of course, to Spanish, except it's old.
Yeah, like especially in the classical orthography, like the way it was written back in the 16th century, they used their own writing conventions to make the sounds that the way they would write Spanish, right? So, like for example, like the we, right? You would be so. For example, and we use it in our version of it too, just to make it easier. But let me give you an example, like. So, maybe this isn't the best place to put it, but, so, or, a lot of times the name for and also they would also say, or yeah, Moctezuma, yeah, Suma, right? So these are the ways that people have written it out. That Z is so, right? It's more of an S. But the reason why it's kind of clunky for modern days is because we don't even use this symbol, which makes that same sort of like soft S sound in Spanish, right? That people put with a Z. Well, and that's kind of the reason why we tried to make it more phonetic. So the original name would have been Mo Te Ku. Well, Soma is it's you could actually spell it with an S, right? Motekusoma. Motekusoma. But that's one of the reasons why, in terms of the spelling, it's not quite as relevant as the sound, right? And I think that's also one of those things too, when you're talking about contemporary usage of the Nahuatl language, people who speak it now, people who learn it now, use conventions that make sense to the language reference that they use. So a lot of these communities in Mexico use Spanish sounds from their community and use it and write it in a way that their people understand the sounds. So depending on how you choose to frame the sounds, you can spell it any way you want. And so that's something too that like we will be, like we covered in the original couple of classes when we covered orthography and the sounds of the language. We codified the way the sounds the way the sounds are going to be written for the purposes of our class, so that way there's no miscommunication. X is always going to be sh. CH is always going to be ch. That J is always going to be yeah. It's a consistent thing, so that way it facilitates the pronunciation and the learning of language. Yeah?
Let me just ask you a question since you're on that.
Sure.
How is TZ pronounced? Because I keep hearing it different.
Yeah. So it's
You know, like in, you know, I've heard it like in cats, you know, but I've heard it pronounced like similar to just an S.
yeah. Well, the reason why is the TS is softer than most people's well, because when you spell it with the TZ, it makes you think like it's gonna be harsh, right? Like right, like some sort of like really yeah, no, like zine or something. Yeah, like when you say you know, nonansi, right? Nonansi. So that TS or that TZ, so TS, TZ, ultimately you can spell it any way you like. It's a so
Like
sa.
a sa?
Huh?
Like sa?
Yeah, like an S. It's, well, see, when I say S, it's like, in an English understanding of what the sound S sounds like, it's like a soft S. So
Yeah, because I've heard it, you know, pronounced like a sa, you know. And for me, it's been confusing because I hear people saying that you actually pronounce the T in the S, like in cat.
yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, and if you were to compare it to other words, I mean, it's like, I kind of compare it to like the word, like tzatziki, right? Like if you go to like, you know, some people say, oh, is it tzatziki or tatsiki? Like, there is that thing where like, okay, well, you can say it any way you want, and I understand you.
Exactly.
And to some degree, that is going to be the case with a lot of words when you're talking about Nahuatl and different communities in Nahuatl, because to say it has to be a hard Z or it has to be a soft S, like, it all depends on how the community uses the language that they're in. So in some communities, you will have the sound be a lot softer, and in like in some of those examples, like that hle is a Guerrero Nahuatl convention that happens all across Guerrero Nahuatl. But if you learn the classical, you might be able you still understand this. Macuili and macuihle, in my mind, it's not that different because the sound is more or less it's analogous, right? So if I go to a community that speaks with a soft ending, I can still recognize it as being 5, even though it doesn't sound the way I would pronounce it or the way I learned it from whatever community I learned it from. So that's kind of one of those things where we will notice that there is like a bit of variety when it comes to pronunciation, and also like just not being too rigid as to saying this is the way it has to be, but more this is the way that people do say it in different communities. And my hope is that we make it universal enough to where it's useful to use, so that you can pick it up, even though you might not speak their variety of Nahuatl, but you might be able to pick up and understand more.
So it's kind of like a slang or like a
Dialect.
or like an accent.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very much more like an accent, because in the same way that, you know, in English we have so many different ways and not just that, different like you said, slang. There are certain words that are used by particular communities to refer to a specific thing that a different community might have a different word for it, a different concept. You might say hello in a different way. You might, greet each other differently. And those are the things that that we'll try to address when it comes to giving as much information without overloading. You know what I mean? And sort of like down the middle conventions that people can use and do use in communities where a lot of what do they call it? Intelligibility. Sorry, where that aspect is the core of our learning, so that it's accessible for different communities. I think this was the last example for that. Where are we on time? Set o'clock. Okay. Good, because that gives me time to delve into the story aspect of it. Do we want to cover a little more about, for the people that got here a little later, just to cover all of the resources on the class again before we head on to the Viaje to Mictlan story?
So again, we put the resources on the website for anyone that came in late. If you go to Google or go straight to the website, societyofnations.org. You go to the website, the homepage, programs, and here's a list of our programs. The first one is the language program. Click on that, scroll down, you'll see the event page, so you know when the next class is. If you don't already know, here you're going to see the class resources. You can click on that, and then we have our resources from class 1 to today's class, class 5.
And those include all the slides.
The Quizlets are here with the slides, and all the other material that's under there. Everything on there, if you click on it, you'll see that it's in PDF, so that way you can download it to your phone, computer, or print it. So it's pretty universal. And everything from our classes will be posted on this page from now on.
Yeah.
So that you can always go back. Also, there's the videos there from the lesson, so you can always click on the link of the video and play the video from that class if you need to watch it or hear it again.
Yeah, and as we cycle back into the module, so once we finished the classes, we will go back and
Touch up
reboot,
anything we need to
yeah,
touch up.
and recommunicate a lot of that information, just so that we can, catch everybody up who may have come in a couple classes in and want to learn more and want to be a part of a interactive community environment, which I think is the best way for people to learn. Because you're already on the back foot a couple classes late, and then to have to watch videos and try to learn it on your own, it's a lot harder. We want to provide a space for people to come and speak to each other and do activities together and learn in a more natural way that I think that it's better and more long-lasting when it comes to people retaining that information.
Alright, so which one do you want to go to?
Oh, no. So this one I didn't actually put on the website. It's on one of the other side tabs. No. It's down here in the downloads. My bad. Right here. Viaje to Mictlan. It's that one. You can just hit play. Up here. Use some water. Is there any coffee in the back by chance?
A little bit.
It looks like
Okay.
it.
I'm just gonna take a little just to refresh a little. My bad, Mitch. But yeah, so.
There would have been more, but I accidentally put it in the wrong side.
Oh, that's
of
fine.
the water.
I do not mind at all. It's plenty. I need something to palatalize stuff a little better. Okay. So, in honor of Dia de los Muertos and just that aspect of our culture, I was asked to create a presentation to sort of talk about the story of Quetzalcoatl and his Viaje to Mictlan and that aspect aspect of our tradition and how the story is relevant to our lives today, and how we've kept it as part of our oral tradition. So yeah, Omitowaya inwewetke inilamate. It was said by the old men and the old women. So it was said by the old men and the old women that prior to this current age, there were 4 other ages, and 4 other suns, and 4 other kinds of people that lived upon the earth. And it was said that at the end of the 4th age, that the Teo gathered at Teotihuacan to create the next and the current age, and the moon and the sun, and the space that exists. And there was a fire built, and the sun and the moon were created. After all of that, they talked to each other about who would live upon the earth. And they would say, well, in previous eras there were people, and those people are gone. They've gone down to Mictlan, to the place of the underworld, the place of rest, of entropy, where everything is quiet, still, and there is potential. And so they said, well, who among us will go? Who can go? And they discussed it amongst themselves, and they selected Quetzalcoatl and Xolotl. Now, Quetzalcoatl and Xolotl were brothers. They were twins, spiritual twins. Their souls were linked to each other, and their souls were interrelated. And they picked them because Xolotl was a guide for the underworld. He guided the sun through its daily cycle into the underworld, and so he knew the way. Next slide. So Xolotl said, I will take you. Follow me, I know the way. And they traveled down into Mictlan. Now Mictlan is very big and multi-leveled. They say that there's 9 levels to Mictlan. That there are places, and it's a long journey down. So when people die, they have to travel a lot to get to that final rest, and there's a lot of challenges along the way, and it's one of those things where, some people, if they don't have all that they need, it takes them longer. But because Xolotl knew the way, he got there pretty fast. So he went down all of the levels, down to the bottom in the 9th level, and there they met Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli, so the Lord and the Lady of the underworld. And in their throne room there was a pile of the precious bones of all the previous generations of humans, stacked there like a treasure. And when they got to the throne room, Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli told them, or asked them, why are you here? Why did you come to see us? And Quetzalcoatl said, they have sent us because they are worried as to who will live upon the earth. We have come from up top to learn, to gather the bones, to create the new race of humans, the new people that have to live upon the earth. And Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli didn't like that because they treasured the bones a lot. They didn't want to get rid of them at all. And so, but Mictlantecuhtli was very sly, and so he said, okay, that is very good. I will give you the bones, but I have one condition. Next slide. So he presented him with a challenge. He said, give me, he handed him a shell, and he said, I have a challenge for you. He asked Quetzalcoatl to blow his shell 4 times, and 4 times around his kingdom. And in exchange, he would give him the bones that they needed. Next slide. Shell like this. But the problem is that his shell didn't have any holes, and there wouldn't be any sound. And Mictlantecuhtli said, well, this is how I get him. This is how I can present a bargain. and not have to pay out. So Quetzalcoatl saw that it didn't have any holes, and he thought, I have an idea. And so he called upon the worms and the bugs that crawl and devour the earth and turn things, and he had them build holes, little holes inside of the shell, so that there would be space for the air. And then he also called upon the bees to come inside of the shell to buzz and make sound. And it was in that way that Quetzalcoatl won one over on the Lord of the Underworld. And so the sound ringed through all of Mictlan, and Mictlan Tecutli heard. And so his challenge was fulfilled. Next slide. But Mictlan Tecutli didn't like that, because he's like, man, I gave him an impossible challenge and he fulfilled it. I can't let them win. I can't. This is where they must stay. This is where the bones must stay. And so he called out to his messengers and told them, hey, tell them to bring the bones back. Tell them to leave them here. Tell them to bring the bones back. And when they heard that, Quetzalcoatl was like, well, just let them know that we'll bring them back. And so Xolotl basically yelled into Mictlan, we'll bring it back. And they took off, running back to the surface, essentially making a promise that, yeah, they will have to keep, the bones will have to come back. Humans will not be mortal. Will not be immortal. They will live for a time and return. And so they ran, running up all the layers and trying to escape. But even so, Mictlan Tecutli knew that something was afoot, because he's like, they haven't come back. So what he did was he sent his messengers to build a hole, to dig a hole, so that they could trip and fall. And he also placed a group of quail right by the hole so that they wouldn't notice. And Quetzalcoatl ran, and Xolotl ran behind him, and they didn't notice until it was too late. And the quail startled him, causing him to fall into the hole. And as a result, the bones were scattered and broken. The bones that were meant to create this next humanity fell into pieces and were mixed all up in a way that, and Quetzalcoatl was, well, he fell and he was unconscious, but when he came to, it became apparent that, what's the point of all this if all this has been for nothing? Why has this happened this way? And he even asks Xolotl, and he says, how are things going to be? How will things be now that this has happened as a result of our quest? And Xolotl said, which basically translates to, well, what do you mean, how will it be? It's fallen apart, but we've got to go. Like, let things come out as they may. Things will be as they will be. And I think this is such a deep lesson, because, things will happen in life that cause, situations didn't turn out the way you wanted, but that doesn't mean that it's a failure. Let's make of it what it will be. And so they picked up the bones, and then they left the underworld. And so they took the bones to Tamuanchan. And Tamuanchan is a place, one of the place of our home, the place where nurturing exists before we live upon the earth. And in that place, reside the souls before they are to be born. And next slide. And then so Quetzalcoatl met with Quilasli or Cihuacoatl. Then Cihuacoatl ground the bones into a powder and placed the powder into a bowl, a sacred jade bowl. And with Quetzalcoatl's blood and with the blood of the other Teteo, it was mixed with the bones and created a dough, which created the first humans. Well, the humans now, the humans of this age. And next slide. And in the oral tradition, they say, "Auniman pitohke, otlakatke, un teteo inmasehualti, which translates to, and they said, thus they are born, the creative ones, the humans. And it's really interesting too because this concept of teteo, a lot of times people really literally interpret it as gods, but there's so many ways that teteo is something different, and teteo in this context also represents that aspect of us, of our creative potential as people, and that infusion of creativity that allows us to be not just people on the earth like previous generations, but infused with that creative energy to build a world of our own on the world, if that makes sense. And this concept of inmasehualtin, the deserving, because we have come through a lot. We have come through this great journey where the bones came from a place of potential and were worked with and were preyed upon and created new life from it. And so because of that energy that it was expended at our expense for our being, we are deserving to exist because a lot went in to make us. And that is the story of our existence as people. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I've read that Mictlan, the journey to Mictlan was very treacherous, that there was rivers of blood and mountains clashing against each other.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like a horrendous place to have to travel through.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that death is a lot like life for our people in the sense that it was another long journey. Life is a long journey, they used to say that like the world, it's very slippery on the earth. The world is full of troubles, tribulations, and that doesn't change when you go to rest until you rest. And that's kind of one of those things where the levels of Mictlan represent the levels of that your mind, that your soul has to sort of prepare itself in order to meet that final rest, in order to meet that place. And yeah, in terms of, that's why I say there's 9 levels to Mictlan, and each of those levels are tasks that have to be performed. In the same way that Quetzalcoatl had to prove himself against unimaginable odds, the same is true of humans when we go to our rest. Like it's not just from here to there, and it's not just themselves by themselves, because death is also about not just us as people leaving, but what we leave behind and everything that comes as a result of that. The memories that are stored, the things that people have to keep their memory for you. And that's also one of those things that it's expounded upon with the celebrations that we have as far as Dia de los Muertos, because it's at this time that not just we remember our ancestors and the people who have come before, but they come to us. They come to us, and for a moment they taste the life that they had. And so yeah, it's definitely a lot of the imagery that's used for like the levels of Mictlan are very much metaphorical aspects of trial. So yeah, there is a place where like the mountains crash together, or the winds are as cold as knives, or you know what I mean. Because that has to do with very much like the way that these levels deal with the personal aspects of losing yourself and not being a person upon the earth anymore. You know what I mean? Like we as people, we live a life with history and ego and all this emotional baggage that we walk around with every day, and all of that has to depart from us if we are ever to reach a point where we are at rest completely. We don't have a sense of ourselves either. That's also something that comes into that metaphorical sense of what the levels of Mictlan are.
Were there like deathbed rituals or did a lot of this happen in the process of dying?
Oh, are you talking about like the unveiling? I mean, to some degree, depending on the kind of death. So, for example, women in labor was a big one because of the fact that infant mortality rates are really high, not just for the children, but also for the women in particular. And women not only were like the creators of the providers of life, but also and sustainers of life. But the metaphorical relevance of a woman giving birth was like a warrior in battle, because a woman has to give all of herself in order to catch this soul and bring it into the world. And in some of those cases, the women didn't survive. And in those cases, the midwife in particular had like a whole compendium of speeches with regards to like, hey, look, while you're giving birth, hey, look, you know, fight. You gotta fight. You gotta be like the women who made you. You have to be like the warriors who brought you to this world. You have to fight and do. And when
surrender.
yeah, and then that also was a part of it too. Once it got to the point where you knew that there was no more you could do, then there were a lot of speeches like, okay, you know, now it is time for your rest. You have to prepare, and that was also. I'm sure there are more than what we know. I know that for sure because of the little that survives. But what little does survive, I mean, we do know that for sure. But yeah, I'm sure there were many processes when it came to, especially if you knew that somebody was dying. It's rare the case that would happen in most people's lives because, you know, death can come at any time. And so a lot of times they were more part of like funerary rites, where like at the funeral there would be speeches given to these people about, okay, now now you prepare to leave us. Now, you know, the sun has cast away its light, but it will come again. And there are references to things like that in some of the old stories as well. Yeah, good question. Any other questions?
It was just beautiful the way that there's parallels to that kind of story of like the descent into the underworld, about the shedding of like humanity and ego and all of those things like in ancient cultures across the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the ancient Greek myths, there's, you know, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's the Inanna myth where she goes and comes back, right? Like there's that concept of like what that journey continues after death, like kind of goes around the world.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, our souls don't end with death.
Yeah, and also the cyclicality of life and death, in the sense that like, I wore this today. I made this a while back, but like I like it because it reminds me of the fact that it is very much one part with the other. You can't have life without death, and you can't have death without life, and both are mutually. They mutually feed and perpetuate each other. Like you wouldn't live if you couldn't eat things that are dead, and from from death comes new life. It's part of the natural cycle, and that's also a beautiful thing too, is that knowing that, you know, once you're gone, it's not over. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And it's as much to like accompany the dead as it is to comfort the living that survive, right? Like, your loved one does not end, right? Their journey still goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a good comment. I like it. And I think the only other thing too that I guess Laura wanted me to mention specifically was a part of like her. Well, I think it's one of the other tabs.
In that, I'm
Yes,
curious
yes.
about the carving. It looks like there's like a pattern on the stone,
This
which
one
was
here?
carved as well.
Yeah. So this is actually from a monument in Teotihuacan. So it dates to about like 100, 180 around there. Yeah, and so this is sort of like it's almost like a halo in that sense. It's this luminous aspect of death where it generates in the same way. Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously this part is broken and missing, but I mean you can imagine it going all the way around. But yeah, this was like a monument that they found in Teotihuacan.
Well, it's the sun, isn't it? It's the sun.
Exactly. It's the sun in its travel under the world in death. So like people conceived of the sun like going going down and then under the world and then back up in the morning. So the journey through Mictlan is very much the sun when we no longer see it living its life and traversing through the underworld and coming out each morning to come back over.
Cycle of life.
So
This cycle.
was Mictlan sunlit?
When the sun was down, yes.
Yeah.
And this is one of the weird things too, is that people often think of Mictlan when like as this dark place, but I mean it's only dark because there's no light. When the sun goes down, it's like, you know, if you lived on the other side of the world, it'll be daytime whenever the sun gets to you. So yeah, so basically Mictlan was illuminated whenever the sun went down. So for our eyes, for those on Tlalticpac, for the people who live upon the earth, like Mictlan is dark while the sun's out. But when the sun goes down, it illuminates down there and you don't see nothing up here. And so sometimes people conceive of that like movement of light and darkness as that cycle of life, like you were saying. So like the darkness of the underworld came up at night when the sun went down to illuminate, and then the cycle moved across the sky again. So whenever the sun would come back up, then the darkness would be underneath. And it's very much this balance of light, darkness, of life, death. It's a perpetuating cycle that continues forever. Good question. I like it. But yeah, and in terms of that, yeah, let me see. I think it's that one image that maybe here, where it says Codex Law. Yeah, okay, and so this, Lotto wanted me to make mention of like the concept of these, so when it comes to like our writing system, like I said, there's different elements to the pictorial nature. We covered this in the what do you call it? The study session that we had where I did an exposition on the Nahuatl writing system. But this one is actually Mixteco, I think. Yeah, because of the drawing. But anyway, it conceives of the same concept. So the living person was thought to embody 3 different aspects. So it wasn't just like one person, one soul, that's it. Like we're composed of like 3 different essences that compose of our souls. So on the one hand you have Tonali, right? Which is like and they represent it with like hair or like light, the warmth of your body. And that was the sense of yourself that was related to like your personality, the quirks that you have as individual people, and a lot of that was based on when you were born and at what time. There was a concept of ihiyot, which is like literally your breath, the air that gives you life, the thing that lasts as long as you are living, and that was sort of something that lasted till you reached your physical end, at which point the ihiyot doesn't exist anymore. And then there's this concept of teyolia, which is literally, I mean, they represent it here as like a spine or a backbone, but teyolia is literally like the thing that gives one life, and it's like an animating principle in a sense. Like yolia comes from the sense of like yolot or heart, and yolot comes from the concept of olin or movement. So the concept of not just the heart being the thing that moves, but the thing that moves you. You know what I mean? That energy that moves you, the physical animating aspect of your life. You know what I mean? And yeah, and so just as a reference, this concept of like, what goes to Mictlan, what goes to other places, when, a lot of that really just depends on how people's mindsets are with regards to how the soul is composed. But in ancient days, it wasn't just the one thing, because you can have one without the other. You know what I mean? Your to some degree, your teyolia continues on even though it's not here, and same with your tonali. And tonalis can come and go in your life. Like when people say, "Oh, te dio un susto," you know what I mean? Like it was a thing where like you lose yourself, and you've had moments like that too. And also like especially in other instances too. I know people who if they get intoxicated or they drink too much, become a different person. It's like you lose a part of yourself. That part has gone, but it's not. And it's not to say that you aren't you as a person, like, but your character is different. But yeah, also having an understanding of a person being being composed of several parts, and not just like, okay, well, you are who you are, and that's a very static thing. Where it's like our concept of like what it is to be a soul, what it is to be a person, is very much a conglomeration of several different aspects that entail that. But yeah, I do appreciate y'all's attention for the presentation and all that. Like, is there any questions you guys had, or like other things that we might want to go into in terms of the class? I'm really kind of surprised that we ran through the actual class portion, because I think we were planning to have like a danza presentation, but you know what? there is, well, we could kind of go over there is some of the, what do you call it? A presentation that was made by one of our jefes, Masad, that does have a lot of relevance to Dia de los Muertos and the concept of traditional thought when it comes to these higher concepts of metaphysics and stuff like that. I mean, it's up to you guys whether or not we want to do that, or if we want to cover material from a previous class. If you have any questions about the language in and of itself, then maybe you as a newcomer have questions about the language itself, and then we can sort of like cover that a little bit in depth. The good thing about having everything up online is that it's all available. It's all the access is there for all of us. So we can easily pin, like if you're like, oh, I have a question about like gender. Okay, cool. Like we'll just go to the website to the page and then cover that if you want. Or yes.
Where was this particular Guerrero dialect spoken?
Gaudencio is from a community in Copalillo, Guerrero, which is like
the state of Guerrero.
in the state of Guerrero.
Oh.
Yeah. So Copalillo is like the town that his people are from. And there are like other associated towns in that area of Guerrero that speak basically the same variety of Nahuatl that he does.